My mother-in-law, Eleanor, slid a mug of coffee towards me, her smile a little too bright. "Something special for my hardworking son-in-law," she chirped, "to put some pep in your step." I thanked her, but a cold knot tightened in my stomach. Just moments before, from the corner of my eye, I'd seen her tip something from a small, unlabeled vial into that specific mug before adding the coffee. My father-in-law, Richard, always eager to one-up me or simply oblivious, reached past me. "Smells good, Eleanor? Think I'll have that one." He took a large gulp before I could say a word. 30 minutes later, during a lull in the forced brunch conversation, Richard's face went pale, a sheen of sweat on his forehead, and he mumbled about feeling dizzy before lurching towards the guest bathroom. Eleanor's practiced smile faltered, her eyes darting from Richard to me, a flicker of panic quickly masked. I felt a grim certainty settle in. My initial shock was a silent explosion, but outwardly, I kept my expression neutral, merely asking if Richard was all right. This wasn't just passive disapproval anymore. This was an attack, and I needed to understand why. The truth is, Richard and Eleanor Ainsworth had never thought Marcus Holloway, a supervisory park ranger for the National Park Service, was good enough for their daughter, Chloe. Richard, a retired CEO, once asked at a family dinner, "Still playing in the woods, Mark. When are you planning on getting a real job with a corner office?" His disdain was palpable. Eleanor was subtler, often sighing to Chloe, "Darling, are you absolutely sure Mark can provide the kind of stability and refinement our family is accustomed to?" She'd introduce me at their stuffy social gatherings as, "This is Chloe's husband, Mark. He works outdoors," with a dismissive flick of her wrist. These weren't isolated incidents, they were a constant, low hum of disapproval. Leading up to that disastrous brunch, Eleanor had been unusually insistent. "Mark, dear, you simply must sit here. It has the best view of the garden," she'd said, guiding me to a specific chair. And her fussing over my coffee was uncharacteristic, twice offering to freshen it up. Before I'd even taken a sip, her eyes a little too watchful. My gut, honed by years of observing subtle shifts in animal behavior and environmental cues, told me something was off. Chloe and I met 7 years ago. She was an elementary school teacher volunteering for a trail maintenance day in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where I was giving a brief talk on bear safety and local ecology. Her warmth and genuine interest in the natural world captivated me. I admired her passion for teaching, her quiet strength. We bonded over shared hikes, quiet evenings by the fire in my modest cabin just outside the park, and a mutual disdain for pretense. We were married a year and a half later, a simple ceremony by a mountain stream. Those early years were idyllic, filled with the scent of pine and the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other without needing many words. Our life was a stark contrast to her parents' world of manicured lawns and business portfolios. My family background was solidly middle class. My parents, a librarian and a mechanic, valued hard work, integrity, and experiences over possessions. The Ainsworths, on the other hand, lived in a sprawling house in the wealthiest part of Charlotte, their lives dictated by social calendars and stock market fluctuations. Richard couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose a career that involved dirt under their fingernails and the risk of encountering a grumpy bear over a lucrative corporate position. A park ranger. He'd scoffed when Chloe first told them. "Is there even a pension plan for that?" My work was demanding but fulfilling. Last spring, a major storm caused a significant trail washout. Coordinating the GIS, Geographic Information System, mapping for the reroute and the deployment of repair crews, ensuring visitor safety, and managing the ecological impact, that was my world. It was a world Eleanor and Richard viewed with a mixture of bewilderment and contempt. Their attempts to drive a wedge between Chloe and me had been ongoing. Eleanor once, accidentally, forgot to include me in the invitation to a prestigious charity gala, telling Chloe later, "Oh, darling, I just assumed Mark would be far too busy with, well, whatever it is he does in the wilderness." Richard, on more than one occasion, had helpfully suggested alternative careers for me, once even bringing a brochure for a timeshare sales company. "Good money in that, son, and you get to wear a suit," he'd boomed. Eleanor constantly played on Chloe's anxieties, remarking how my dangerous job must be a terrible strain on her. "What if something happens to him out there, all alone?" she'd whisper, loud enough for me to overhear. The brunch incident, however, was a terrifying escalation. It was no longer about snide remarks or exclusion. It was a direct, physical attempt to harm or incapacitate me. The Monday after the brunch, while Richard was still complaining about a violent stomach bug, I carefully retrieved the coffee mug he'd used from the dishwasher, hoping some residue remained. My ranger training emphasized methodical evidence collection, even if this scene was a pristine kitchen. I also made a mental incident log, noting Eleanor's behavior, Richard's symptoms, and the timeline. I called David Miller, a fellow ranger and a good friend, who had a cousin, Sarah, working in a private toxicology lab. Family matter. I told Sarah, keeping it vague but urgent. Can you test this for anything unusual? The wait was agonizing. Chloe noticed my preoccupation. Is everything okay, Mark? You've been so quiet since Mom and Dad's. I couldn't bring myself to voice my suspicions to her, not yet. Not without proof. A week later, Sarah called. Mark, there were traces of lorazepam in that coffee mug. Not a lethal dose, but enough to make someone seriously disoriented, drowsy, maybe even cause short-term memory loss. Where did this come from? Lorazepam, an anti-anxiety medication. I also subtly asked Chloe if her mother took any regular medication. Mom has pills for her nerves, I think. Chloe had said absently. She gets flustered easily. My blood ran cold. Eleanor's overly solicitous behavior towards Richard after he got sick, her constant fussing and downplaying his symptoms, now looked sinister. I confided in David. His usually jovial face hardened. Lorazepam. Mark, that's premeditated. Eleanor. I always thought she was a bit of a snob, but this is certifiable. David, surprisingly tech-savvy for a guy who spent most of his time in the backcountry, suggested, if she got a prescription, there's a paper trail. Or maybe she bought it illicitly online. People get desperate. We could also check if there are any security cameras on their street. Might show her going somewhere suspicious. The camera idea was a long shot for their gated community, but the prescription angle stuck with me. David also reminded me, remember Ranger Henderson? His in-laws nearly drove him off a cliff with their meddling. You gotta be smart about this, Mark. The lab report was damning, but I needed to connect the lorazepam directly to Eleanor's intent. Chloe, increasingly worried by my grim mood, and her mother's unusually frequent, saccharine phone calls, inadvertently provided the next piece. It's so strange. She mused one evening. Mom called today, and she mentioned she'd had a massive clear out of her bathroom cabinet. Said she was spring cleaning her old medicines. The day after the brunch, of all times. A sudden, chilling thought struck me. The next time we visited the Ainsworths, a brief, strained affair, I made an excuse to use the guest bathroom, the one Eleanor often used when she wanted privacy. Feigning a search for an aspirin, I quickly checked the trash can under the sink, and there it was, a crumpled prescription bottle. Eleanor Ainsworth. Lorazepam. Filled just 2 weeks prior. And it was nearly empty, far more pills gone than a typical dosage would account for over that short period. This was the core evidence, the irrefutable link. The anger I felt was a cold, hard knot in my chest, mixed with a profound sadness for Chloe. A direct, furious confrontation would achieve nothing. Eleanor would twist it, play the victim, and Chloe would be caught in an even more agonizing crossfire. I needed a plan, a way to reveal the truth that minimized the damage to Chloe while ensuring this never happened again. I meticulously documented everything: a photo of the pill bottle, the lab report, a timeline of Eleanor's actions before and after the brunch, Richard's exact symptoms. I chose a quiet evening, when we were curled up on our sofa, the scent of wood smoke from our fireplace filling the air. Chloe, I began gently, there's something serious we need to talk about concerning your mother and the brunch. I laid out the evidence, piece by piece. Her initial reaction was stunned disbelief. Mom, Mark, she couldn't. Tears welled in her eyes as the implications sank in. Then came a wave of grief, followed by a quiet, firm anger. That explains so much, she whispered, her voice trembling. Her constant little comments, trying to make me doubt you, doubt us. By the end, her tears were for the betrayal, but her resolve was clear. We have to confront her, Mark. This isn't just about you, it's about our marriage, our life. What she did, it's monstrous. We decided the confrontation needed to include Richard and possibly Chloe's younger brother, Ethan, who was more down to earth than his parents and had sometimes chafed under Eleanor's control. Our strategy was simple. Present the facts calmly and let the evidence speak for itself. Chloe called Ethan, explaining the situation. He was initially skeptical. Mom, drugging someone. Chloe, that sounds insane. But as Chloe laid out the timeline and the discovery of the pill bottle, Ethan went quiet. Then he said, she did something similar. Well, not drugging. But she told my ex, Sarah, that I was seeing other people and not ready for anything serious. Right when I was about to ask Sarah to move in with me, Sarah broke up with me. I never understood why Mom would do that. It became clear Eleanor's manipulative behavior was a long-standing pattern, driven by an insatiable need to control her children's lives. We arranged a family meeting at the Ainsworths' imposing home. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Richard looked wary. Eleanor feigned cheerful ignorance. A meeting? How lovely. What's this all about, darlings? It's about the brunch, Eleanor, I said, my voice steady. And what you put in the coffee? Eleanor gasped dramatically. Marcus! What a perfectly dreadful accusation! I would never. Richard looked from me to Eleanor, a frown deepening on his face. Mark, this is a serious thing to say. It is, I agreed, then laid the toxicology report on the polished mahogany coffee table. This is what was in the coffee Richard drank, lorazepam. I then placed the photo of the nearly empty pill bottle beside it. And this, Eleanor, is your prescription found in your guest bathroom trash, almost entirely used up shortly after it was filled. Chloe's voice, though trembling, was firm. Mom, why? Why would you do that? And why were so many pills missing if you claim it was some kind of accident? Eleanor's composure began to crumble. She stammered about stress, about possibly getting her medications mixed up, but her eyes couldn't meet ours. Richard stared at the evidence, then at his wife, his face a mask of dawning horror and anger. Ethan spoke up, his voice tight. Mom, this sounds like what you did to me and Sarah. And what about all those times you accidentally let slip something to Chloe's old boyfriends that made them look bad? The carefully constructed facade Eleanor had maintained for years shattered. She tried to rally, accusing me of trying to destroy the family, but her words lacked conviction. Richard finally turned to her, his voice dangerously low. Eleanor, did you deliberately give Mark or me those pills? Cornered, with her husband and both children looking at her with a mixture of shock and condemnation, Eleanor broke down, not in remorse, but in the frustrated tears of someone whose power had been irrevocably stripped away. Her authority, built on years of subtle manipulation, vanished. In the aftermath, Chloe, Ethan, and I pieced together the full extent of Eleanor's interference. It wasn't just about me, it was a lifelong campaign to control her children's choices, their partners, their very lives, all under the guise of maternal concern. The drugging was a desperate, dangerous escalation when she felt her control slipping. Richard, deeply ashamed and furious at Eleanor's deception and the risk she'd posed, insisted she seek professional counseling immediately. He also, in a strained voice, apologized to me and Chloe. Eleanor was forced to offer a tearful, albeit unconvincing, apology. The old family dynamic was dead. A new order, based on honesty and firm boundaries, had to be established. Chloe and I significantly reduced our contact with her parents. Visits became infrequent, brief, and always with both of us present. Eleanor, after a few initial attempts at tearful guilt-tripping, "How can you do this to your own mother?" eventually fell into a sullen compliance when Chloe firmly reiterated, "Mom, your behavior was unacceptable. These are our boundaries now. Respect them, or we won't be able to see you at all." When Eleanor's tone occasionally sharpened during these limited interactions, I found my ranger training in de-escalation surprisingly useful, calmly redirecting the conversation or firmly ending the visit if necessary. Our marriage, forged in this fire, became stronger than ever. The ordeal had stripped away any lingering illusions Chloe might have had about her parents' infallibility and solidified her trust in me and in our partnership. We spent more time outdoors, hiking, camping, finding solace and reconnection in the wild places we both loved. "I feel like I can finally breathe," Chloe confessed one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "I'm not constantly walking on eggshells, trying to manage Mom's moods or Dad's expectations." We were finally living our lives on our own terms. Months later, Richard called me directly. His voice was gruff, devoid of its usual bluster. "Mark, Eleanor is attending her therapy sessions regularly. She's quieter?" There was a pause. "And I've made a substantial donation to the Park Conservation Fund in your district. Thought you should know." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement, a concession. I realized then that our victory wasn't about crushing them. It was about protecting our family, reclaiming our peace, and forcing a change, however reluctant. We were employing a form of adaptive management in our family dealings now, learning from the conflict and adjusting our strategies for future interactions, always prioritizing our well-being. A sense of quiet settled over our lives. The constant undercurrent of tension from my in-laws had dissipated. I could focus on my work, my responsibilities as a supervisory ranger, which included everything from search and rescue coordination to ensuring my team was proficient as CIA's wilderness first responders, WFRS, and most importantly, on my life with Chloe. Eleanor remained a subdued presence in our lives, her attempts at manipulation replaced by a wary civility. Richard was more respectful, almost deferential at times. I learned that true strength wasn't about playing someone else's destructive game or sinking to their level. It was about protecting what you loved with integrity and quiet persistence, about building a life based on your own values. It was about drawing clear lines in the sand and holding them, not with aggression, but with unwavering resolve. And that, I realized, was the most profound victory of all.